Wave-based combat encounters in D&D is something that seems like it would fit into a D&D setting pretty well. But when you're playing D&D 5th edition and you want to throw tons of enemies at your players wave after wave, you start to realize, doing the math, that not only is this a suboptimal way to run combat, but it can take a long time and will usually result in a TPK. In reality, simply throwing 10 enemies at your party is enough to not only take the whole session, but be very difficult and possibly even kill your players. It can get boring, it can get stale near the end, and players near the end of a long combat encounter kind of just feel like that it's dragging on, that there was no point to any of this in the first place. What if I told you, though, that there was hope for running a wave-based combat encounter with dozens, possibly hundreds of enemies in a single session at your players? What if I told you there was a way you could do this and it take the same amount of time as a normal combat encounter, while the players expend more abilities and spells and features than they ever have, and this could all be done in a way that crescendos into a final boss fight at the end? That fantasy, that idea of running hundreds of enemies at once against your players and making your players feel like they're backed into a corner and cleaving through hordes of mobs, is exactly what my point defense combat mechanics are for D&D 5th edition. So before we get into the rules, let's first preface what type of scenario these combat mechanics are going to be useful for. So these rules are going to be mainly useful for when you want your players to be fighting against hordes of enemies and defending a specific point or object or person, or just an area in general that they're trying to defend from these enemies. You can still run these mechanics I've created without having something specific to defend, but if you can, I would include something to defend for them, because it is going to add a layer of strategy to these mechanics, and it'll make them think a little bit differently about how they prepare themselves. Also, be sure to have a map of some sort for your players for this encounter. This type of rule mechanics that we're going to be using, it does not really work for the sort of theater of the mind style of combat, so if you can, make sure to have a map for this type of combat encounter. So to start, let me create for you some sort of an example scenario that this rule set might apply to. That way you have something to reference in your mind throughout this video. So for example, a scenario I might use these rules for is your players are adventuring through the Underdark and they come across a Mind Flayer citadel. And your players are slowly working their way through this Mind Flayer citadel. And then at the center of it, they find this Mind Flayer Elder Brain. And this Elder Brain contains perhaps all of the history and knowledge of this Mind Flayer society that used to exist here, but has since vanished. And so the players, maybe they need the information this Elder Brain has because it's crucial to some sort of quest. So they stay to talk to the Elder Brain here. But what they don't realize is that a Dweregar scout that has been following them sees what they are doing, runs away, and goes to get more allies. And as they're talking to this Elder Brain, they start to hear the sound of war drums and marching, and they look down hallways and corridors to see that hundreds of Dweregar are approaching their position, and they're going to have to get ready to fight and possibly defend this Elder Brain if they want the information that it holds. So, to begin the mechanics of this scenario, we would start with something called a preparation phase. Now, these preparation phases are going to be before every wave of combat. So you're going to have a preparation phase, then a wave of combat, then a preparation phase, then a wave of combat, and so on and so forth for every wave of combatants that you throw at the players. Now, I would decide on an amount of waves ahead of time, so the sweet spot here is probably anywhere between 3 and 5, but it really depends on how many enemies you want to throw at your players at each time and overall. So decide on a wave amount ahead of time, but we're going to have a preparation phase before each wave. Now, these preparation phases can last anywhere between a minute and 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. I would not allow these preparation phases to give the players a short rest. You don't want the players to be able to short rest during these preparation phases, unless of course they have some way like catnap or something to do that, because that is going to be all they do ever in these preparation phases if they're allowed to. So I would make it short enough where they can't short rest, and ideally somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. Now, there is some merit to going to 11 minutes for this, and that's because most ritual spells will take 11 minutes to 10 minutes to cast. So if you want to allow some of your caster players to be able to get a ritual spell off during these preparation phases, I would set it at about 11 minutes. Now, the purpose of these preparation phases is to give players that time to prepare and set up ambushes, defenses, traps, barricades, things of that nature, things that are going to allow them to fortify their position and create tactical advantages against the onslaught of enemies coming their way. These phases are also a way between waves to have sort of a regroup and reformat of strategy for the players, allow them to adapt to what you're throwing at them and create new ideas and strategies to defend themselves. To help facilitate these preparation phases, I would include, if you can, a number of different sort of items and objects and features on your battle map and try to describe that to the players. So things like furniture, high points, low points, doorways, choke points, items like oils and furniture and objects and things that are going to allow the players to sort of spark their creativity. Because some players are more creative than others, and some might immediately think of something they want to do during their preparation phase, while others might sit there and think, I don't know what to do. And so putting these items across the map and making sure players understand their environment and what's in it will allow them to sort of catalyze that creativity. Now, the next thing to talk about is the objective that they are defending. So, like I said before, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to, but I think including this is a good way to increase the complexity of the player's strategies that they have to work with, because trying to defend something specific versus just defending yourselves can be a lot more tricky. So for the thing they are defending, you might be inclined to track that thing with hit points. So if it ever gets hit during combat by enemies, then it would lose hit points. But I would recommend here actually doing hits instead of hit points. So typically you might say, well, the Elder Brain has 100 hit points, and if it loses those, it dies. Well, in this case, maybe try something like 10 hits kills the Elder Brain. The reason for this is that hit points can be a bit hard to predict in D&D. One round can be the difference between being full hit points and being at 0. So what I would do is use hits. That way things are more consistent, not only for you as a DM to track how things are going, but also for the players to track how things are going. Because with crits and all of those types of things, it can be very difficult to sort of know and predict where the status of your objective is going to be over time. So if you do hits, that'll allow players to sort of understand exactly where it's at. If a fireball goes off, they know that if it nicks the objective, it's just going to take one hit and not lose maybe half of its hit points in a single hit. Okay, so now that we've discussed the preparation phase and the objective they're defending, let's talk about the actual combat waves, because as I'm sure many of you are still wondering, how are we going to throw dozens or hundreds of enemies at the players without, 1, slowing things down, and 2, resulting in a TPK, because as we all know, action economy is king when it comes to combat balance. So starting off, for each wave of combatants, we will be using, for these combatants, the minions rule from 4th edition. So if you're unfamiliar with minions, minions are a type of enemy class in 4th edition D&D where they have 1 hit point. So these minions retain all of the stats they normally have. Whatever creature you want to use, you can use that creature, but you limit them to having 1 hit point. And the reason we do this is twofold. For one, this allows you as the DM to have a much easier time running combat quickly because you do not need to track hit points. If an enemy gets hit, they die. You just take them off the battlefield, they're dead. And the other reason we do this is because this will allow us to balance the combat around this many enemies, because enemies only take 1 hit to die. So the allies can clear them out much more quickly. So doing this with these minion rules is going to allow us to throw a lot of enemies at the players, and the amount of enemies you throw at them is going to be up to you as the DM to figure out. So I want to give you a number that's going to be good for each player. Say 1 player can handle this many minions at a time, but I can't really give you that number because it really depends on your creatures and your players. The level of your players is going to dictate how many minions they can handle, their armor class, their hit points, as well as what the minions' hit points, armor class, and attack rolls are. So I can't give you necessarily a number I think is best for balancing, but just know that you should consider when balancing this, how many minions can one player handle, and then extrapolate that across the entire group, keeping in mind that some players will likely never get targeted during a round, while some players will get exponentially targeted by more enemies than just the amount you balance them around. So keep that in mind, that the combat here can get very sort of flip-floppy depending on how many enemies are alive at any given time. Now, some things to note when running these minions is to make sure to give your minions only one or maybe two different attacks that they can use. That way your turns as the DM are going to be quicker and simpler because you're not sitting and looking through an entire stat block at like 5 or 6 different abilities. Just have 1 or 2 attacks, probably 1 melee and 1 ranged, that the minions can do, and then that's it. And keep in mind, a great way to balance an encounter like this is make it in tight corridors and give your enemies only melee attacks. This will vastly limit how many minions can attack on a turn because choke points allow them to not be able to push through their allies and get within melee of the players. So melee only minions in tight spaces will actually balance the combat encounter quite favorably towards the party. I would also recommend using average damage for your minions rather than rolling damage, just for the sake of ease and the sake of speed during combat. And another optional rule I would use, and this is really up to you and how many spellcasters are in your player's party, but I would recommend using a rule where if minions save against spells that do damage, so for example, like Fireball, if you succeed on your saving throw against Fireball, you still take half the Fireball damage. I would use a rule where if minions save against those types of spells, they take no damage. So if 10 minions get hit by a Fireball and 5 of them succeed and 5 of them fail, 5 of them die and the other 5 live because they succeeded. This is going to help balance out the fact that spells that require saving throws are guaranteed kills on minions. So you're going to want to use this rule that makes it so minions aren't guaranteed to die from saving throw spells. And the last thing I would recommend as far as minions is initiative. And there are a couple ways that you can run initiative here that's going to help out. Firstly, I would put your minions at set initiative order. So rather than rolling initiative, put your minions at maybe initiative count 10. And the reason for this is that it'll allow, for the most part, typically your players will, some of them will go before the minions. And the reason this is important is because players that go before the minions are going to clear out a lot of minions before the minions have their turn. So this is going to be another great way to balance combat. If you want minions to go after some of the players, then just set them at a specific initiative. And then secondly, I would break your minions up into groups and have group attacks. So let's say you have 30 minions that are attacking the players on a given round. I would put maybe 10 of those minions are attacking from the left, 10 from the front, and 10 from the right, and do separate initiatives for those groups. And the reasoning for that is, one, so your turns as a DM don't take so long, because you don't have to do 30 attacks on your turn. You can do 10 and then it's somebody else's turn. And also, this is going to allow for combat to be much more reactive for the players because it'll feel more like a back and forth. If you have players going and then players stop going and then all of the enemies go and then all of the players go, it's not going to feel as dynamic or reactive. People aren't going to be able to think on their feet as much and react to what's going on versus if you had players, enemies, players, enemies, players, players, enemies going. That's going to make combat much more of a back and forth and much more reactive. And then finally, I would do something like a final boss here to cap off the final wave. So at the end of all the waves, a great way to crescendo this fight would be to throw a final boss at the players. Now, you might be thinking that this is going to be a bit dangerous and you should weaken the boss because players are going to be very exhausted from this many enemies, but I'm about to get into some unique mechanics here, so bear with me and keep in mind that I would actually use a boss here that's fairly balanced towards the party being at full health with all their abilities. So make sure this boss is still a challenge for the players by itself, or, throw some minions in with the boss to give it a bit more action economy. But overall, throwing a boss in to cap off these waves is going to be important because it'll feel like the fight's been crescendoing to this moment where all the Dwargar are running away, but then a couple more Dwargar start entering the room with like chains that they're pulling that are being wrapped around the neck of some large beast that they set loose onto the players. Some final boss to really cap everything off. So now that we've discussed the combat waves, the preparation phases, and all of that, and we have an idea of the structure of this encounter, let's now begin talking about some new mechanics that I'm introducing here that are going to allow your players to, one, feel like this encounter is more special and unique, and two, it's going to allow players to keep high ability uptimes and allow them to sort of continue to fight hard throughout a large scale battle of this size. These mechanics are going to help players really lean into that sort of fantastical power fantasy aspect of being like the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. They're going to be backed into a corner against the odds, completely outnumbered, but able to sort of pull that inner strength and do these amazing things in the heat of battle. So first off, we have new weapon attack rules. Now, the reason I'm introducing these rules is because these rules are going to allow your melee weapon and ranged weapon based characters to keep up with the spellcasters and their AOE potential and still feel like the fighter and the ranger are just as relevant as the wizard in a combat encounter that's going to be very AOE focused because all you need is 1 point of damage to kill these enemies. So on your turn, when you hit with a melee weapon attack, you are able to continue that attack through an enemy and continue on to enemies past that. So let me give you an example. So let's say you're a fighter and you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies and you roll an 18 to hit the enemy in front of you. Well, you rolled an 18 to hit and this enemy has 1 hit point, again, because it's a minion. So you hit that enemy with an 18 and you cleave right through them. And now you can continue that swing. That attack keeps going to the next enemy. Any enemy within your reach, within your range of the weapon, you can then continue to attack that enemy, but your plus to hit goes down by 2. So if you're, say, a fighter and you have your greatsword out and you hit an enemy in front of you with an 18 and their armor class is a 10, well, now you have a 16 to hit the next guy as long as he's within your range. So you move that attack to the next guy with a 16, and then the next guy with a 14, and then the next guy with a 12, and so on and so forth. And then if you hit one with a 10, and then go for the next one, and now it's an 8, you miss. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow melee characters, when they take a swing with a weapon, to hit more than one enemy with a single attack, and it's going to be based on how high they roll over the armor class. So, like I said, it gets reduced for every enemy you hit with that attack. So, if you roll a 12 to hit and they have an armor class of 10, you would hit, and then you could hit another guy because now you have a 10 to hit and their armor class is now 10, but you wouldn't be able to hit a third. Versus if you rolled like an 18, you'd be able to hit like 5 of them. So, rolling high is going to benefit how many enemies you can hit with a single attack. So for ranged attacks, the same thing applies. So if you make a ranged attack and you roll to hit a target, the ranged attack now acts as a line attack and pierces through targets. And the line is the same length as the short range of your weapon. So if you have a crossbow that has a short range of 30 feet, then you fire your weapon in a 30-foot line and you roll to hit the first target. Say you roll an 18 and the target has a 10 AC. Then the projectile would go through to the next target, and now it's a 16 to hit, and then the next, and now it's a 14, and so on and so forth, going down by 2 each time until the plus to hit no longer beats their armor class, and then the projectile would stop. So the whole idea here is that you can get multiple targets with weapon attacks so long as the plus to hit is at least meeting their armor class, and it will continue to go down the more enemies you hit. Now, there are plenty of ways to balance this and tweak the numbers if you need to balance this around your players, because a lot of the balancing of how many enemies you can hit with these attacks is going to depend on the armor class of the enemies, as well as the pluses to hits of the allies, as well as how many attacks the allies have. If you have a fighter that's making 4 or 5 attacks in a turn, then it might be a smart idea to make the tweak the numbers of the mechanics to make them a bit harder. So ways you could do that are lowering or raising the amount of minus they have to their hit after each enemy. So maybe instead of a -2 every time they hit, it's a -3 or -4, and that would make them hit less enemies in a single strike. Or you can make it easier and make it a -1. You could also balance it by simply just raising the armor class of the enemies. So there are lots of ways to tweak this, but overall this is going to allow your weapon-based characters to not feel left out in this large AOE type combat encounter. Now, these weapon attack rules were inspired by some rules from MCDM's new Flee Mortals book. So if you're looking for more ideas on how to do this type of thing, you can check out that Flee Mortals book by MCDM. That's where I kind of got some inspiration for this, though I think this system might be slightly better than that for what we're trying to do. But there are tons of rules in that book about running minions and bosses and all sorts of things that could be incredibly helpful for this type of encounter. So that Flee Mortals book might be a good one to check out if you're looking to try and do this type of thing. Now, moving on from the weapon attacks, let's talk about the points system. So this system is going to be the most sort of lengthy and wordy type of system that I'm including in here, and something that the players are going to be interacting with a lot. So if I were you, I would print out some of these rules for the players. Here I have a card that I've made and printed out that has the rules for one of these types of points on it. So something like this might be a good thing to print and be able to give to your players, or even just a piece of paper that has the rules for these points on them, because these points are going to be something that they're collecting and using throughout the fight, and it's going to slow things down if they have to stop and ask you what they do every time they get one. So if I were you, I would give your players something like this to reference when they get these points, because these points are going to be the most unique and wordy and thing they gotta kind of remember when they do this. Now, if you use these rules a lot and you play a lot of encounters like this, they'll probably begin to remember these rules, but still, it's nice to hand out something, and it's nice for the players to have something they can hold and keep track of and kind of keep, count of how many they have. So the first type of points we're going to discuss is tactics points. So tactics points are types of points that the players can earn when they do things that give them a tactical benefit during the preparation phases. So things like creating barricades, traps, creating choke points, fallback points, weakening different walls, breaking out new entrances, things like this that are going to give them a tactical advantage in the fight. When they do these things, and of course you should still have them roll to make these things, because it shouldn't be guaranteed that they can make a structurally sound trap or barricade. But when they do these things and succeed, you can give them and perhaps the rest of the party tactics points. So who earns these tactics points is going to be based on who the thing that was tactically made affects. So for example, if someone makes a barricade over a door that's blocking all of the Duergar from pushing through that doorway, and it's structurally sound, that helps the entire party. So something like that would probably give everybody in the party a tactics point. Versus if someone makes for themselves perhaps a sniper's nest in a high point where they can stay away from the battlefield and plink away at the enemies from a distance, that might be more of a tactics point for just them, because that nest really only helps them. So for these tactics points and for the other points that I'll be mentioning, it really is up to you as the DM how you want to distribute these and, when you feel that something is worth a point. But that's part of the beauty of it, is you have these in your toolkit to dole out to players as rewards for them doing things that you want to embrace. Now, as far as what tactics points do for the players, well, tactics points are going to be a currency that they can spend, and they can spend it at any time using a free action. So it's free to do in the middle of combat or in preparation phase. They can just spend these points. Now, what they can spend it on are a couple things. You can spend these points to regain expended spell slots. So the spell slot cost is equivalent to the amount of points. If you have 1 point and you try to spend it on a level 1 spell slot, you'll get that spell slot back. But in order to buy, say, a 3rd level spell slot back, you would need 3 tactics points to purchase that. So players are going to be collecting these points and then exchanging them for these benefits. So spell slots are one thing they can regain. Another thing they can regain is short and long rest abilities. So things like Action Surge might be something, or Second Wind. Those types of things are going to be things that they can regain with these points. Now, the cost of that is going to be 1 tactics point for a short rest ability and 3 tactics points for a long rest ability. Now, like previous systems I've mentioned, tweaking is everything here. If you want to tweak this system and the cost of these points for the equivalent spell or ability, then feel free to tweak it. I find that 1 point for short rest and 3 for long rest is probably right, but there are some short rest abilities that are better than long rest abilities. So it's really all up to you and how you want to tweak this. But overall, they're going to be able to spend these tactics points for regaining their abilities, regaining their spells, regaining the resources they need to continue fighting. Now, next up, we have momentum points. And momentum points are going to be gained by the players doing things during combat that give them momentum, that feel like it's making the fight lean in their direction. So some examples of these things might be completing an entire wave without the objective taking any damage, killing a certain amount of enemies in a single blow, maybe you kill 10 enemies in a single attack, executing on unique strategies or coordinated attacks. Maybe the rogue takes and coats a hallway with oil, and then as the Duergar are passing through, the wizard hits a firebolt in that hallway and lights it up. That would be a unique strategy, a unique trap and tactic that would allow them to maybe gain some momentum. So things like this, things that are actively combat type things that would turn the battle towards them or are particularly successful. These types of things would earn momentum points. And overall, when you're trying to distinguish between when you dole out a tactics point versus a momentum points are going to be mostly doled out during combat rounds, whereas tactics points will be given out during preparation phases. So both phases, preparation and actual combat waves, have sort of their own type of point. And tactics is kind of for the preparation, and momentum is for the combat. And you can, of course, give these out at different times if they apply to those other times, but in general, tactics is for preparation and momentum is for actual combat. Now, momentum points work a little different than tactics points. So rather than spending the momentum points that you get, you gain stacking benefits for every momentum point that you have stacked up. So momentum points can stack up to 3 times. When you have 1 momentum point, you gain an extra reaction on your turn. So this reaction refreshes the same way your normal reaction does. On your turn, you get your reaction back, except for now with 1 momentum point being held at a time, you have an additional reaction. Now with 2 momentum points, you still have that additional reaction, but now you also have a 1d4 bonus to all attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. So this is sort of like a buffed up bless that you get for having 2 momentum points at a given time. And of course, this type of thing would stack with bless. So if someone wanted to bless you and you have 2 momentum points, then you would have 2d4 to some of those things. And finally, at 3 momentum points, which is the maximum stacks you can hold while still gaining new benefits, you have the ability to now cast multiple spells in a single turn, and weapon attacks are no longer ever made with disadvantage. So to break that down into the 2 parts, normally you cannot cast more than 1 spell on a turn. So if you wanted to cast something like Fireball, which is an action, you couldn't cast Misty Step as a bonus action because those are both spells. Well, with 3 stacks of momentum points, you remove that limit. And if any of you have been playing Baldur's Gate 3 lately, which I'm sure is a lot of you, that's exactly what Baldur's Gate 3 does. It removes that limit, and so 3 points of momentum points here is going to feel familiar to Baldur's Gate players because that's what this is doing as well. You're removing that limit. You can cast Fireball and Misty Step in the same turn. And the second half of this says that you no longer make attacks with weapons at disadvantage. And so what this means is that you never have disadvantage. So it's not giving you advantage, but normally, let's say if you were blinded and have disadvantage on an attack roll against an enemy, now you just have a straight roll. This isn't giving you advantage, so if you have a straight roll, you don't get advantage. It just negates any disadvantage. And one more thing players can do with momentum points is if they have 3 momentum points built up, of course they always retain those benefits as long as they're holding those 3 momentum points. But they can also exchange 3 momentum points for 3 tactics points. So what this is going to do is allow them to make a decision. If they have 3 momentum points, they can continue to hold on to those and retain those benefits, or they can spend them to regain some 3 tactics points, which will help them get their abilities back, but then they lose all of those stacking benefits and have to rebuild up those momentum points again. So it's a bit of a trade-off that might be something that they have to make a decision in the moment because they are missing abilities, but they still love these benefits, and they have to make a decision there. And something important to note about that is when you get to the maximum momentum points of 3, you can't gain any more momentum points. So this will not allow players to build up a huge pile of momentum points that they can keep spending. If they want to turn momentum points into tactics points, they'll have to lose all of their momentum points to do so. And the last thing I want to mention about momentum points is that momentum points don't work like tactics points in which you might give one player tactics point. Momentum points are for the whole party. So if the wizard goes and makes an attack with a fireball and it kills like 20 enemies in a single blow and you feel that that's worth momentum, the entire party gets momentum point, not just the wizard. And lastly, we have victory points. And these points are earned for completing waves. So these points themselves are a guaranteed type of point that all players are going to get one of whenever they beat a wave. And so there are a few things you can spend victory points on. For the cost of 1 victory point, you can heal yourself for half of your HP maximum, or you can regain a spell slot of 4th level or lower. So what this is going to allow is for some consistent restoration for both healing and for spells for players, because players are going to start to wear out those abilities over time. And so victory points being guaranteed at the end of every round are a great way to keep players alive, but also not necessarily put them at full. You know, they only get 1 spell slot of 4th level or lower to restore. And that's not to say they can get 4 1st level spell slots. This doesn't work like Arcane Recovery. They can either pick to restore a 4th level spell slot or a 2nd level or a 1st level. Now, generally players are going to pick the highest level spell slot they can, but keep that in mind. It's just 1 spell slot of 4th level or lower. And for the cost of 2 victory points, a player can give every player in the party 1 tactics point. So this is for the players who want to save up and get those ability restoring features. Then they can do this. They can spend 2 of their victory points, which is earned from completing 2 waves, and they can spend those on giving everyone 1 tactics point. And finally, for 3 victory points, you can spend 3 victory points to heal the objective for either a hit or a certain percentage of their HP. So this is going to depend on how you as the DM decided to run your objective, if you were deciding to do hit points or hits. But for 3 victory points, they can heal that objective for just a little bit, just 1 hit, or maybe like 20 HP, something like that. And it's important to keep this cost relatively high, like with 3 victory points, because you do still want to maintain that threat of the objective losing HP and it being a sort of dangerous game. And of course, it's a dangerous game to save for those 3 victory points because you are not spending these victory points to heal or to regain things. Overall, this point system with these 3 types of points is going to allow players to regain things and keep themselves sort of flowing and moving and not allow this combat to turn into just, you know, I hit, that's the end of my turn type of thing. They're going to be able to keep getting those fireballs and misty steps and action surges and all of these things back during the fight. As well as it's just going to reward them for the types of things you as the DM want them to be doing. You know, being strategic, making defenses, and doing the types of strategies that are going to get them rewards. So, to recap the rules, this encounter is going to happen in waves, a certain amount of waves that you predetermine, maybe 3 to 5, and there's going to be a preparation phase before each wave of combat. That's roughly 2 to 10 minutes, and it's going to give the players time to set up. The party must defend a specific objective. This can be an NPC, an object, or just a building or location, and they have to try and defend that objective against the incoming enemies. Each wave of enemies is going to consist of a large number of enemies that are going to all use the minions mechanic from 4th edition, which gives them 1 hit point. Weapon-based attacks in this mode now have new AOE potential with new weapon attacks that allow melee weapons and ranged weapons to cleave through enemies and continue hitting more enemies. During the encounter, players will be able to earn tactics points, momentum points, and victory points to continue to regain abilities and progress their character and keep their character alive during the fight, as well as encourage a sort of tactical type of playstyle. And the encounter will end with a final boss to sort of crescendo to and cap off the entire encounter, making it feel more epic and more cinematic and just overall make the players feel like the fight was building to something. So those are the point defense combat mechanic rules for 5th edition that I've made. Feel free to modify these any way you want. Of course, you could make the objective be a moving objective. It could be that the players have to fall back after each wave to a new point because of some environmental thing that's pushing them. And so there's a different battle map every time and they have to adapt to their new surroundings. The objective could be an NPC that doesn't want to be defended by the players and is resisting the players. All of these different things can be modified and tweaked to make the combat encounter more exciting and allow you to continue to reuse this. And just like with my large scale combat rules, and for these rules as well, and the speed challenge rules, these rules are meant to be a toolkit for you as the DM to conveniently and easily run encounters that you wouldn't normally run in D&D 5th edition because you just feel there aren't the rule sets for these encounters. So that's the whole point of these videos. So I hope you find these rules as well as my other rules informative, helpful, and just a nice thing to have for running encounters in D&D 5th edition. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.